Over the years, there have been significant discussions over the wage difference between the U.S. men's and women's soccer teams. In 2016, the Women's Players Association filed a complaint against the U.S. Soccer Federation for wage discrimination. Do the players have a case, or is there some type of economic reasoning for why the pay difference exists? To answer this question, we're going to take a look at the labor markets for each team. The market is very similar to a bilateral monopoly because there's one buyer and one seller. The players are only allowed to play for the U.S., and the U.S. Soccer Federation can only get players from the team's respective unions. Just like any other economic graph, there are supply and demand curves. The demand is equal to the marginal revenue product, or the revenue coming from one additional unit of labor, and the supply is an aggregation of the lowest amount each player would play for, or the reservation price. But in a bilateral monopoly, there are two additional curves, the marginal factor cost and the marginal revenue of labor curve. The MFC shows that a firm has to increase everyone's wages if they hire a new worker that has a higher reservation price. And the MRL represents the marginal revenue gained for all players that comes from a unit increase in labor. Monopolies will always maximize profit where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. The Federation will maximize profits where MRP equals MFC. That point would then be traced down to the supply curve to determine wage and labor levels. The wage level here would be wage 1. Alternatively, the players' union will maximize their wages where MRL meets supply. This is because the supply curve acts as the marginal cost to the players' union. This would lead to wage 2. From these decisions, there are two wage points that each side wants, wage 1 and wage 2. Through negotiation, the final wage will end up between these two wages. But looking at the graphs, even if the lowest men's wage and the highest women's wages were chosen, there's still a large discrepancy between the wages. Wage 1 would trace out to here, but it's still much higher than wage 2 for the women. This is because there's such a huge difference between the marginal revenues of production. In 2015, the Women's World Cup generated $73 million. The 2014 Men's World Cup did $4 billion. When the women won the World Cup, they received $2 million, but the men were eliminated in the round of 16 and received $8 million. You can see the difference here in how the marginal revenue production of the men's is shifted over so much more than the women's. Overall, the men generate much more revenue than the women. This is why their marginal revenue production is so much greater. So the firm, the U.S. Soccer Federation, in this scenario, is willing to pay more for their labor. It appears that the U.S. Soccer Federation isn't discriminating against women. Rather, they are making wage decisions based off of what makes economic sense for their business.